Hi, everyone. Welcome to our week 7. This is Dr. Telleria, and I hope you're enjoying our class up to this point. I know that we are making the final turn to our last week of the class, which will be next week. But in the meantime, let's continue talking about some of these concepts. For this week, we have chapters 12, 13, and 14. In as far as the readings are concerned, the key topics in these 3 chapters are decision making. Chapter 14, chapter 13 discusses innovation and the role of entrepreneurs, and chapter 14 discusses conflict resolution and the role of power in organizations. So let's first talk about organizational decision making. What is organizational decision making? Well, it's basically responding to problems. Organizational decision making is all about designing a course of action that will solve a problem and in doing so create value for the organization, right? For organizational stakeholders. In organizations, you have either programmed or non-programmed decisions. The programmed decisions are the ones that we're used to every day, that are repetitive and routine and expected. Non-programmed decisions are decisions that are unexpected, novel, or unstructured. So you can see that if you think about your own organizations, think about the decisions that you have to make every single day, and which of them are programmed and which of them are non-programmed. All right, so in organizational theory, we look at the different decision-making models that are studied and that we use to study decision making. We're going to be looking at 4 different decision-making models in this chapter, and I'm going to briefly introduce and explain them. But you please feel free to read the chapters so that you can learn them in more in depth, right? So the first one is the rational model of decision making, or sometimes called the rational decision making model. And the rational decision making model is all about rationality, rationality in the context of economics, right? When we are rational human beings, we make rational decisions based on rational behavior, and it all comes down to information that's provided to us, expectations, and how do we see a problem, how do we envision it. So a rational way of going about a problem is to identify and define the problem. Once you identify the problem, you generate solutions, potential solutions to solve the problem. And finally, you select the solution that best fits the problem and you implement it. So this is your standard rational decision making strategy. Now, the rational decision making model has many advantages, but it also comes with some, it doesn't come without criticism, right? Criticisms. And we'll see here in a minute why. So the underlying assumptions of the rational decision making model are: the first one is that decision makers have all information at their disposal. And right there, you can begin to see that this is actually false, right? We don't have all the information that we need to make decisions every single time we make a decision. The second assumption is that decision makers can make the best decision, and this is not always the case either, because we're assuming that people are capable of making the best decision possible, making rational decisions, and that's not always the case. And then the third one is that decision makers agree about what needs to be done. And this also isn't the case, because you often have people pulling in different directions and wanting to make different decisions, but who ultimately makes the decision is that person who controls or who has some power or authority over others. So these are the criticisms of these assumptions. The first one is that information and uncertainty, right? This assumption that managers are aware of all the information and all courses of action. This is not real. This is not true. And this is one of the criticisms. Managers have to make decisions based on the information that's provided to them at a specific period of time. But it is unrealistic to think that they're going to have all the information at their disposal. Then we also believe, or at least the theorists believe, that managers all have the same ability to make decisions correctly, and that is also not a realistic assumption. There are some managers that are better capable or better prepared or have more knowledge about a certain situation than others. And then lastly is uh, that we assume that managers agree about what is the most important goal or best course of action. And this also is not always the case because managers have competing desires and competing objectives, whether they are personal or organizational. And so, again, this is yet another criticism of the rational decision making model. The second model is the Carnegie model, and the Carnegie model is a model based on the concept of satisficing. Okay, satisficing. And what is satisficing? Well, it's making decisions based on limited information. Okay, so with the limited information that we have about reality, about life, about a problem, we make the best decision possible. This limited information is called in theory as bounded rationality. This is what we know to be bounded rationality. It means that we individuals are boundedly rational. Um, we have a limited capacity to process information. This is the work of Herbert Simon. The concept of bounded rationality is Herbert Simon's, which is the gentleman that you see here before you. And Herbert Simon was all about the idea that we satisfies rather than maximize because we don't have all the information at our disposal. And so we have to do the best that we can with the information that's provided. Okay? So this is the Carnegie model. The third model is the incrementalist model, and this model suggests that individuals make decisions by incorporating incremental pieces of information, incremental changes. Okay, so it's we think about this model as muddling through. Okay, the science of muddling through. This is a way that managers take a course of action that's previously used and they will tweak it as they go along. They will tweak it to try to avoid the mistakes that they have made in the past by making changes through a succession of incremental changes. So this is the muddling through model. Then the other model is the unstructured model. And this describes how decision making takes place in environments of high uncertainty. So this environment, for example, would be applicable, not this environment, this model would be applicable for this type of situation that we have now with COVID-19, right? Of course, there's more certainty now than there was before, meaning a year ago, right? And so we have a little bit more information at our disposal, and so managers are able to make better decisions now than they made a year ago or longer than that. But still, there is a great deal of uncertainty, and so this model represents or at least illustrates that kind of a scenario. In this model, decision making is not a linear process or a sequential process, but rather a non-linear process, in a process that involves making, jumping up and back and forth. In fact, it even considers the possibility of going backwards. Sometimes the best course of action is to go back, is to retreat, right? And so this is that kind of a decision-making model. And then the final one that we're going to discuss here is the garbage can model. Okay, the garbage can model, and this is a view of decision making that takes the unstructured process to the extreme. So this is a postmodern approach type of process. So the idea here is that decisions or decision making becomes a garbage can in which problems, solutions, actors all mix and contend for organizational action. So, uh, how do you come about with the decision? Well, it's almost it's almost you draw from a hat. That's kind of the idea of the garbage can model. It's putting all of the possibilities into a garbage can, putting all different types of people, different types of leadership models, leadership styles, and managerial concepts, and exploring different scenarios and considering different alternatives and using different product mixes, etc. So everything that you can think of, you put it into this garbage can, and really it's about trying to find a solution by picking just about anything and everything that there is to choose from from uh, from from the menu, right? So it's really an unstructured process. Uh, and again, it's a postmodern approach. It doesn't fit every single organization and certainly doesn't fit every single managerial or leadership style. But nonetheless, it is a model that we study in organizational theory. Now, organizational models which explain decision making also we must take into account when we think about decision making. We must take into account the role of the external environment and the interrelationship between individuals, groups, the organization, and then the external environment in how we learn, right? Because how we learn, organizational learning, is all about the relationships and how we react to groups, to the organization, and to the external environment. So organizational learning takes place at four levels. It takes place at the individual level, at the group level, at the organization level, and at the interorganizational level, which we often refer to as the institutional level. What are some of the factors that affect organizational learning? Well, some of the factors are cognitive. For example, the cognitive structure, which is the system of interrelated beliefs, preferences, expectations, values that predetermine responses or even interpretations of situations. So, for example, in this picture here, you see two co-workers. This is a picture from a firm in Latin America. These are two employees in a firm in Latin America. And in Latin America, it is customary to greet somebody with a handshake, and once you know somebody, people tend to kiss, right? They tend to have a kiss on the cheek, and something that's normal, expected behavior in Latin American culture. Well, this is not expected behavior in other cultures. It certainly isn't in the U.S. and it's not expected behavior or customary in Asian cultures, in China and Japan, etc. So, but yet, how we interpret these actions, right, these responses, and these values uh, will will have an impact on how we perceive things. And the better that we understand the culture of the organization, the better we're going to be able to learn about that organization. The other picture is the little cartoon is about how it's about using money as a bait, or I really shouldn't say bait, but using it as an incentive mechanism to motivate employees, right? And so this is pretty standard in many organizations throughout the world, right? Workers are incentivized through money. But of course, not everybody has a monetary incentive, some depending on the age of the worker and the stage at which the worker is found will determine how important money is as an incentive. And yet, uh, it is safe to say that that money is an incentive and that is standard throughout cultures and throughout different organizations, sufficient enough so that managers can use it as a way to motivate their workers so that they can make the decisions that are in the best interest of the organization. These are these are the ways that managers shape decisions, how they create expectations, how they they promote predetermined responses to situations. Right. This is an example. Okay. So these are the cognitive examples of cognitive elements. Right, in the cognitive structure. All right. So that's chapter 12. Chapter 13 talks about innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity. All right, so let's talk a little bit about innovation here. So, innovation is the process by which new goods and services or new production and operating systems are developed. So, this is all about creating something new. That's the process of innovation. That's what it means to innovate. Okay. Now, in innovation, you have incremental technological change, and you have uh, incremental innovations. So, for example, incremental technological change represents a continual refinement of some base technology. Um, incremental innovations, these are products or operating systems that incorporate refinements of some base technology. Okay. Now, innovation is expensive and needs to be protected, right? So, how do we protect innovation in a company or in an organization? Well, many ways, but the most common are patents. Something, an invention, for example, is protected by a patent. A new cell phone model would be patented. If we're talking about music or a book, we would be talking about copyrights. And if we are talking about a logo or a symbol, we would be talking about trademarks. So whatever the innovation may be, it is protected because it is expensive and it is an asset for the firm. So innovation becomes an important thing. Now, the role of the entrepreneur, okay, because innovation is driven by entrepreneurship, okay, and creativity. So, what are the entrepreneurs? Well, entrepreneurs are the ones in the organization who are responsible for the success or failure of a project. These are the individuals that notice opportunities. They're the ones that identify opportunities, that manage product development, and by doing so create value. They create value for the organization. And many times these individuals, when they find themselves in organizations with cultures that don't allow them to be creative and to add value and to be entrepreneurs, they often leave. And then finally, creativity, right? So innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity. Creativity is going beyond the current boundaries, right? So you have the current boundaries of technology, of knowledge, of social norms, what's expected, what's allowed, in fact, what's the belief system. Well, when you put all these together, innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity, you essentially you are creating, you're adding value by combining and synthesizing these different currents. So, for example, think about using a cell phone and using it to identify clients, identify customers, or identify voters. If you're talking about a political party, so how do you combine technology with an old idea, right? of voting behavior. So, how do you identify voting behavior using technology? How do you improve your ability to understand what voters want, or what are their, how much they value X, Y, or Z, right? So combining and synthesizing new things gives you this opportunity to innovate, to be an entrepreneur, but you have to be creative, right? Because that's where creativity comes into play. Now, in today's high tech world, IT is at the center of innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity. And part of the reason is because of the great efficiency, the value that technology itself produces when it comes to organizations. And there are three ways that it does so. For example, innovation efficiency. This is the cost and time savings that occur when information technology is used. And why? Because it allows employees basically to do things faster, better, more efficient. Okay. A cell phone will allow you to be much more productive than if you don't have one. A computer, obviously, an iPad, other technologies, right? Other IT gadgets will allow individuals to be much more effective, much more productive. You also you also generate value through information synergy, and this is the knowledge building that's created when individuals pool resources and collaborate across boundaries. So, the power of one person with one computer is great, but imagine the power of two persons with two computers, and the power of 20 persons with 20 computers, and so on and so forth, right? So you pool your resources and you collaborate together. The possibilities are endless. So this is the synergy is what generates these value added. And then the third one is boundary spanning activity, and this is where things like networking become very important. Is how do you increase value by going beyond the boundaries to obtain information and knowledge from the environment. So this is where you tap into the external environment. If you are a political party, for example, or a local government, and you want to learn about your constituents, there's only so much that you can learn from the data that you have at your disposal, or from the news, or uh, from 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 the organization. So you might have to go out into the environment, talk to people, interview, etc., to find out a little bit more. And so this boundary spanning, and this is basically expanding your boundaries to try and improve and increase your organization, your information technology value. Okay, and in chapter 14 is all about managing conflict, the role of power and politics. So for this chapter, I've selected two concepts to finish out our discussion. And the first one is conflict. So, what is organizational conflict? Well, organizational conflict is simple. It's the clash between two people or two groups, right? Anything that happens in an organization where you have tension, where you have inertia, where people are pulling at opposite directions, that is organizational conflict. Okay. Um, Now, conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Conflict tends to improve organizational effectiveness because it gets people talking. It gets people to break down barriers, to learn from each other, to remove stereotypes or misconstructions about an organization or a person. Conflict also helps us to understand the other person's or the other party's perspective, and also it gives us an opportunity to learn from each other. So it's organizational learning takes place through conflict. I mean, think about it. most of the time that we learn, right, what we call a learning opportunity, right? Um, it often happens when something goes wrong, right? We learn from our mistakes, is the idea. We often don't learn from our successes, but we certainly learn from our mistakes. And sometimes these mistakes arise because of conflict or vice versa. So, what is organizational conflict now? How do we avoid it? Where can we overcome conflict, right? Well, if you look at this figure here, you see in the light red area, this is the area of goal agreement. This is where stakeholders in an organization, whether it's managers or employees or a union, for example, all of these different stakeholders have different goals, different needs, and different demands. So they're going to be pulling at different directions. What we see here, the area of goal disagreement. But once they come together and if they want to resolve conflict through cooperation, they are going to find themselves able to do so in the red area. And the part of this chart that is the most red, which is at the very center, this is the part where conflict is actually overcome. This is the product of cooperation. This is where solutions are created, in this area in the very center. All right, and then the last concept that we'll discuss in this presentation is power. What is organizational power? The ability of one person or group to overcome resistance from others or by others to achieve an objective. So organizational power comes from many different sources. Here we have an example of two different types of power. We have in the top we have Steve Jobs, who yielded wielded power, I should say, over Apple, um, based on his vision, his ability to lead individuals to do certain things, right? Um, he was also charismatic, so that was a source of power. In the case of President Biden, his power comes from the constitutional um, power that he is granted to as the commander in chief and to execute, to be the executive, the head of the executive branch, etc. Now, the power of the president is a power that, while it's granted by the Constitution, and the Constitution affords the president certain power and limitations, but there are other powers that the president also has, which are not necessarily mentioned in the Constitution, but because of the weight of the office, there's a great deal of power that comes from being the president of the United States that allows the president to yield that authority, right? To have that capacity to overcome resistance. So if you think about an example of two congresspersons from the same political party going and fighting with each other, well, you have the president coming in between them two and becoming a liaison, right, to try to resolve differences. The weight of the president is likely to force these individuals or to promote these individuals to a place where they can come to some compromise, right? So the power of an individual, the power of an office, the power that a position has is instrumental in overcoming resistance in organizations. There are other sources of power in an organization. We just mentioned one being authority, the other one being for example, control over resources. So those individuals who control resources, the ones that have the money, right? the ones that have political power or the ones that have land, labor, and capital. These individuals usually control a great deal of power. If you think about the unions, for example, think about the famous case of the Teamsters Union, right? And Jimmy Hoffa had tremendous power, and his power was because he controlled resources. He controlled the labor, basically the labor of the labor unions, right? So control over resources, control over information is also a huge source of power, right? Information is power. That's why these companies like Facebook and LinkedIn, etc., their power comes from their ability to control all this information, and so that is a source of power. Uh, Non-substitutability, right? If there is someone or something that has no substitute, then you become powerful. You become non-expendable, and if you have control over that, then of course you have power because of something that is non-substitutable. Other powers, other sources of power are control over uncertainty, which is a great power to have. If you can make things happen, if you can help to reduce uncertainty or help to predict the future, right? By making things happen or influencing people or a country or a government, you have control over uncertainty, right? And so that gives you tremendous power. And then you have also centrality, and unobtrusive power. These are also other sources of organizational power. All right. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and um, as always, have a great week, and God bless you. Thank you.